What if the very person you keep praying about is the one God has already answered you about, by removing them? What if the ache you feel is not a sign to return, but a signal that God has carried you out of danger? Chosen ones, hear me clearly today, because this message is not popular, it is not comfortable, but it is necessary. Some of you have been asking God for clarity, asking Him for peace, asking Him for a sign, and God is saying, I already gave it to you when I closed that door. You see, the enemy loves nostalgia. He loves to dress bondage up as memories. He loves to whisper, it wasn't that bad, while forgetting the nights you cried, the prayers you prayed, and the parts of yourself you lost, trying to keep something alive that God never ordained to last. But chosen one, God is not a God of confusion. If He pulled you out, it was not to tease you. It was to protect you. Some of you are mistaking silence for permission. Just because God is quiet does not mean He has changed His mind. Sometimes His silence is trust. Trust that you remember what He already revealed. The X you keep revisiting in your mind was not taken from you by accident. They were removed by alignment. They could not go where God is taking you. The reason this message shocks people is because the world tells you to chase closure, chase comfort, chase what feels familiar. But God tells you to chase obedience. And obedience does not always feel good, but it always leads to life. There are relationships. God ends, not because there was no love, but because there was no future. Not because they were evil, but because they were incompatible with your calling. Chosen one, you are not crazy for outgrowing someone who once felt like home. You are not cold for refusing to go back to what God already healed you from, and you are not disobedient for choosing peace over passion. Today, God is speaking plainly. Do not go back. Not because you are weak, but because you are chosen. Chosen one. When God removes someone from your life, it is rarely about punishment and almost always about preservation. God is far more concerned with your purpose than your comfort. There are relationships that feel right to the heart but are lethal to the assignment placed on your life. Scripture shows us again and again that destiny and distraction cannot coexist for long. Samson was anointed, called, and empowered by God, yet his downfall did not begin with a battlefield defeat. It began with intimacy in the wrong place. His strength was not stolen in one moment. It was slowly compromised because the relationship he held onto was never meant to walk alongside his calling. In the same way, some people are not evil, but they are incompatible with the weight of what God has entrusted to you. God sees what you cannot see. He sees the future version of you, the battles ahead, the influence you will carry, and the resistance you will face. He also sees who will strengthen you and who will weaken you. When God removes someone, it is because He knows that if they stay, you will shrink to keep them. You will begin to negotiate your obedience, silence your convictions, and delay your growth just to maintain emotional peace. But chosen one, God did not call you to be palatable, He called you to be powerful. Anyone who requires you to disobey God in order to stay connected is already a threat to your destiny. Many of you are grieving the loss of a relationship without realizing that what you lost was actually a limitation. That person may have loved you in their own way, but they could not steward the anointing on your life. They could not handle your growth, your prayer life, your discipline, or the changes God was making within you. And instead of celebrating your evolution, they resisted it. Resistance to your calling is a sign of misalignment. God removes people not because they are bad, but because they are heavy. They weigh you down emotionally, spiritually, and mentally, making it harder for you to run the race set before you. There are moments when God steps in not because you asked Him to, but because if He did not intervene, you would stay too long. You would rationalize disrespect, excuse spiritual dryness, and call it loyalty. But loyalty to people must never come before loyalty to God. Some of you were praying for God to fix the relationship, while God was trying to fix your vision. He was trying to show you that the relationship was costing you clarity, peace, and momentum. Every time you tried to move forward, You were being pulled backward by emotional attachments God never authorized. Chosen one, understand this deeply. Your ex could not come with you because they were not prepared for where God is taking you. Elevation exposes everything. It exposes insecurity, pride, jealousy, and fear. God knew that in the next season the pressure would increase, and the wrong companion would become a liability. That is why he separated you before the damage became irreversible. What felt like loss was actually God shielding your future from unnecessary wounds. You may wonder why God allowed you to love someone he planned to remove. The answer is growth. Through that relationship you learned discernment, boundaries, and the difference between attachment and alignment. God uses seasons and people to refine us, not define us. That relationship taught you what you will no longer tolerate and what you truly need to thrive spiritually. But lessons are not meant to be lived in forever. They are meant to be learned from and released. Do not look back and assume that because it once worked, it will work again. The version of you that tolerated less no longer exists. God has already started rebuilding your strength, sharpening your focus, and restoring your confidence. Going back would not just be revisiting a person, it would be reversing progress. God removed them because staying would have required you to sacrifice parts of yourself. He is now restoring. Chosen one, God is jealous over what he has placed inside you, not in a human way but in a holy way. He will protect your purpose even when it hurts your feelings. If he had allowed that person to remain, you might have reached success outwardly while dying inwardly. But God values your soul more than your status. He removed them so you could live whole, focused, and free. What you call heartbreak, God calls deliverance. What you call loss, God calls protection. And what you are tempted to go back to, God has already labeled as a threat to your future. Trust the removal. Trust the separation. God knew exactly what he was doing when he preserved your purpose by taking them out of your life. Chosen one, when God removed your ex from your life, it was not a mistake, and it was not cruelty. It was mercy disguised as loss. God does not randomly disconnect people. He disconnects what threatens the assignment he placed on your life. Before you ever loved that person, before you ever invested your heart, God already knew where you were headed. He knew the weight of your calling, the responsibility attached to your anointing, and the level of focus your future would demand. And because God sees the end from the beginning, he intervened before that relationship could cost you more than you were willing to. Admit. Many people believe that if a relationship felt good at one time, it must still be right. But chosen one, purpose is not sustained by feelings. Purpose is sustained by obedience. There are connections that feel safe emotionally but are dangerous spiritually. Slowly, subtly, without dramatic conflict, they begin to pull you off course. You start praying less, compromising more, justifying behaviors you once corrected, and shrinking your convictions to keep peace. You may not notice it immediately, but over time, your fire dims, your clarity fades, and your spiritual hunger weakens. God saw that trajectory long before you did, and he refused to let your destiny be negotiated away for temporary companionship. God removed your ex because they were consuming energy that belonged to your calling. Every argument, every emotional roller coaster, every moment of self-doubt they triggered was draining strength you needed for what God assigned you to do. The enemy rarely attacks chosen ones directly. He distracts them relationally. If he can entangle your heart with someone who cannot walk in alignment with God's will for you, he can slow you down without ever fighting you head-on. That is why God stepped in. He was not breaking your heart. He was breaking a cycle that would have eventually broken your spirit. Some of you stayed longer than you should have because you mistook endurance for faithfulness. But God never asked you to endure what he never assigned. The relationship required you to keep explaining yourself, defending your growth, and apologizing for becoming who God was shaping you to be. That alone was proof that it was no longer safe for your purpose. When a relationship demands that you stay small to keep it alive, it has already crossed the line from companionship into captivity. Chosen one, God removed them because they could not celebrate the version. of you that obedience was producing. They were comfortable with the old you, the quieter you, the less discerning you, the version that did not challenge them or require growth. But when God began elevating your mindset, strengthening your boundaries and sharpening your discernment, the tension increased, not because you became wrong, but because you became different. And not everyone can handle the transformation that obedience produces. God knew that if they stayed, you would either have to stop growing or keep bleeding emotionally. Neither option was acceptable to him. You must also understand this: God protects purpose at all costs. If something threatens it, even if that thing feels good, God will remove it. He did not remove your ex because you failed, he removed them because you were about to succeed. And success requires alignment. The higher God takes you, the fewer people can walk with you. Not everyone is meant to witness the next version of you, let alone accompany you there. Some people are only equipped for a chapter, not the whole story. The pain you felt when they left was real, but the danger of them staying was greater. Had God not intervened, you might have continued pouring into a relationship that was never designed to pour back into your purpose. Over time, resentment would have replaced love, confusion would have replaced peace, and compromise would have replaced conviction. God spared you from that slow erosion. What felt sudden to you was actually God's long-planned protection. Chosen one, stop questioning what God clearly removed. You are not abandoned. You are preserved. You are not rejected. You are redirected. God saw what you were becoming, and he refused to let an unaligned relationship sabotage the work he began in you. The separation was not a delay, it was divine timing. God cut the cord so you could move freely, love him fully, and pursue your calling without emotional interference. What you lost was not your future, it was an obstacle. What walked away was not your destiny, it was a distraction. And what God protected by removing them was your purpose. Trust him enough to believe that if he took them out, he had a reason greater than your feelings and a future greater than your memories. Chosen one of the most dangerous lies you can believe is that familiarity equals divine approval. Just because something feels known does not mean it is ordained. Just because it is comfortable does not mean it is correct. Familiarity has a way of calming the flesh while quietly numbing the spirit. It whispers safety while slowly leading you away from obedience. God is speaking clearly in this season because many of you are being tempted to return, not out of wisdom, but out of habit. And habit is a poor substitute for guidance. The human heart craves what it recognizes. That is why the children of Israel, after witnessing miracles, still longed for Egypt. They were free, yet they missed bondage, not because it was good, but because it was familiar. Egypt represented predictability, routine, and the illusion of security. Freedom required trust, growth required faith, and faith always feels unfamiliar before it feels fruitful. In the same way, your ex represents something your emotions understand, even if your spirit outgrew it. God is warning you not to confuse emotional recognition with spiritual confirmation. Familiarity dulls discernment. When you know someone well, you stop questioning what you should be praying about. You excuse patterns that once concerned you. You minimize red flags because you already know the outcome, the cycle, the rhythm. You tell yourself, at least I know what I'm dealing with, not realizing that what you are dealing with is exactly what God delivered you from. Chosen one, God did not bring you this far to send you back to what he already exposed. There is a reason God often leads his people into unfamiliar territory. The unfamiliar forces dependence on him. When you cannot rely on memory, you must rely on faith. When you cannot predict the outcome, you must trust the one who controls it. Familiarity gives the illusion of control, but control is not the same as peace. True peace comes from alignment, not predictability. God is not interested in keeping you comfortable, he is committed to making you whole. Some of you are feeling a pull back to your ex, not because God is calling you there, but because your flesh is uncomfortable with the unknown. The silence of the new season feels louder than the chaos of the old one. At least before, you knew when the arguments would come, when the apologies would follow, when the temporary peace would arrive. But now God has you in a quiet place, where there are no patterns to lean on, no emotional routines to distract you, and that quiet is not emptiness, it is preparation. Chosen one, familiarity often disguises fear, fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of trusting God with something as tender as your heart. The enemy exploits this fear by reminding you only of the good moments, never the cost. He edits the memory, he removes the pain, the confusion, the compromise, and replays only the highlight reel. But God remembers everything. He remembers the prayers you cried through. He remembers the strength it took to walk away. And he is asking you now, do you trust me more than what you recognize? Do not mistake nostalgia for instruction. Nostalgia is emotional, but instruction is spiritual. God does not guide you by what feels familiar, he guides you by what produces fruit. And if the relationship consistently produced anxiety, insecurity, and spiritual stagnation, then it was not bearing good fruit, no matter how familiar it felt. Jesus said a tree is known by its fruit, not by how long it has been planted. Longevity does not equal legitimacy. There is also a reason God warns against looking back. When Lot's wife turned back, it was not curiosity, it was attachment. Her heart was still tied to what God had already judged and removed. Looking back froze her progress. In the same way, returning to familiarity can stall your transformation. You cannot move forward while clinging to what God has already asked you to release. Familiarity anchors you to who you were, not who God is shaping you to become. Chosen one, God is inviting you into newness, not repetition. The next season will not feel like the last one because it is not meant to. New oil requires new vessels, new blessings require new boundaries, and new relationships, whether with God, with others, or even with yourself, require courage to embrace the unfamiliar. If God allowed everything to feel familiar, you would never stretch, never trust, never grow. Hear this clearly, comfort is not confirmation. Peace is confirmation. And peace does not come from knowing the outcome, it comes from knowing God is leading. If God removed your ex, do not let familiarity convince you to reopen what he closed. The unfamiliar path ahead may feel uncertain, but it is covered by grace. Trust the God who led you out not to lead you back, but to lead you forward. Chosen one, God does not heal what he intends for you to re-enter. Healing is never preparation to return to what wounded you. Healing is preparation to move forward, without bleeding into your future. When God lifted you out of that relationship, he did not just separate you physically. He began a deep, intentional work within your heart, your mind, and your spirit. He restored your peace, rebuilt your self-worth, and reminded you of who you are apart from anyone else's approval. Why would God do all of that just to send you back to the same source of pain? That would contradict his nature, because God is not a God of reversal, he is a God of redemption. Think about how carefully God healed you. He met you in the quiet nights when memories resurfaced. He strengthened you on days when loneliness felt heavier than faith. He taught you how to breathe again without that person, how to smile again, how to pray again with clarity. That healing did not happen overnight, and it did not happen by accident. Every layer of restoration was intentional. God was not patching you up so you could survive the same cycle again. He was preparing you to walk free from it permanently. Many people confuse healing with readiness to reconnect, but healing is actually the evidence that God has closed a chapter. When a wound heals, it leaves a scar, not to invite you back to the injury, but to remind you what you survived. Scars carry wisdom. They say, you learned, you grew, you overcame. Going back would not be faith, it would be forgetting. And God does not want you to forget the lessons that cost you tears, prayers, and strength. Chosen one, if returning to your ex requires you to lower your standards, silence your discernment, or ignore the peace God restored, then it is not love, it is compromise. God never heals you so that you can compromise again. He heals you so that you can stand firm. He heals you so that you can recognize what is no longer safe for your soul. Before you tolerated what you now see clearly, before you excused what you now ID, enter fire as harmful. That clarity is not accidental, it is a result of healing. And clarity is one of the greatest confirmations that God is finished with that season. Some of you are feeling tempted to go back because you mistake emotional calm for spiritual permission. But peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is alignment with God's will. The peace you have now came after separation, not during the relationship. That alone is a message. God often reveals His will not by what He adds, but by what He removes. If peace followed the ending, then the ending was ordained. God does not heal you only to reintroduce chaos. Remember this: what broke you once can break you again if you return unchanged. But you are changed, you are wiser, you are stronger, and because you are changed, returning would require you to ignore your growth. It would require you to pretend you are still the same person who once accepted less. God did not heal you to shrink you back into an old version of yourself. He healed you to step into maturity, discernment, and authority over your own life. Chosen one, God's healing is directional. It points forward. When Jesus healed people in Scripture, He often told them to go, to rise, to walk, to sin no more. He did not send them back to what crippled them. He sent them into newness. In the same way, your healing is God's way of saying, go forward, live differently, choose better. The moment you consider going back, ask yourself this: would this decision honor the work God has already done in me? The enemy would love nothing more than for you to treat healing as a pause instead of a transition. He wants you to believe that because you feel stronger now, you can handle what once hurt you. But strength is not given to revisit pain. It is given to walk away from it with confidence. God strengthened you so you would no longer mistake intensity for intimacy or attachment for love. Chosen one, do not insult your healing by returning to the source of your wound. Do not call it forgiveness when it is actually familiarity. Forgiveness sets you free. Returning puts you back in chains. God healed you because He values your future more than your history. He restored you because He is preparing you for relationships, opportunities, and seasons that require a whole heart, not a guarded one. If God healed you, it is because He is done with what hurt you. Trust the healing, honor the process, and keep walking forward, knowing that God does not bring you out just to send you back. He brings you out to bring you higher. Chosen one, the future God is calling you into cannot be sustained by the version of you that existed in your past. Growth is not optional when destiny is involved. As God elevates you, He reshapes you. Your thinking, your boundaries, your tolerance, and your discernment. The person you are becoming requires a different level of discipline, wisdom, and courage. That is why going back is so dangerous. It is not just about returning to a person. It is about reverting to a version of yourself that God has already outgrown. When God begins preparing you for your next season, He starts changing you internally before anything shifts externally. You begin to see differently. What once excited you now exhausts you. What once felt normal now feels heavy. This is not confusion, it is maturation. But if you return to your ex, you will be forced to either abandon this growth or constantly battle to maintain it. Neither leads to peace. Growth cannot thrive in an environment that requires you to explain, defend, or dilute who God is shaping you to be. Many of you are experiencing loneliness, not because you are lacking something, but because you are shedding an old identity. The space you feel is where the old patterns used to live. God cleared it intentionally. But instead of honoring that space, you are tempted to fill it with what you already know. Chosen one, familiarity is easier than transformation. Transformation requires patience. It requires faith. It requires trusting that who you are becoming will eventually feel as natural as who you used to be. But you must give yourself permission to grow without dragging the past along with you. Returning to your ex would require emotional regression. You would have to re-enter old cycles, old reactions, old arguments, and old compromises. You would find yourself managing emotions you already healed from, reopening conversations God already closed, and tolerating dynamics you already outgrew. Growth does not mean you think you are better than anyone. It means you are different, and different environments require different behaviors. The future God has for you cannot be built on outdated patterns. Chosen one, God has been teaching you how to choose peace over chaos, truth over attachment, and obedience over impulse. These lessons were not temporary, they were preparation. The next season will require emotional stability, spiritual maturity, and discernment you did not have before. If you go back, you will not be able to sustain the demands of that future because you will be constantly divided, one foot in obedience and one foot in nostalgia. Division weakens authority. God is calling you to be whole, not split. There is also a deeper truth you must face. The version of you that tolerated less no longer exists. You now recognize manipulation where you once saw passion. You now notice inconsistency where you once made excuses. You now value alignment where you once chased intensity. Going back would require you to silence that discernment. And silencing discernment is one of the fastest ways to grieve the Spirit. God gave you wisdom through pain, and wisdom is meant to guide you forward, not escort you backward. Some of you fear that if you do not go back, you will miss out on love. But God is not preparing you for scarcity, He is preparing you for stewardship. The love He has for you in the future requires emotional health, not emotional survival. It requires boundaries, not desperation. It requires confidence, not self-abandonment. God is shaping you into someone who can receive healthy love without losing themselves. That version of you cannot be sustained in a relationship rooted in who you used to be. Chosen one, growth often creates distance before it creates clarity. You may not fully see yet why God had to change you so deeply, but you will. One day, you will look back and realize that if you had returned, you would have forfeited everything God was building within you. The growth you are experiencing now is not random. It is intentional preparation for doors that have not yet opened. And those doors require a mature you, not a familiar you. Do not betray your growth for temporary relief. Loneliness will pass, discomfort will pass, but the consequences of regression linger. God has invested too much in you to let you settle for who you used to be. Honor the transformation, protect the boundaries, trust that the future God is leading you into requires exactly who you are becoming, stronger, wiser, and finally free. Chosen one, obedience rarely makes sense in the moment, and that is why so few people choose it. When God tells you not to go back, He is not asking you to understand everything. He is asking you to trust Him completely. Obedience often places you in a lonely position, where your decision is misunderstood, questioned, and even criticized by others. People may not see what God showed you in prayer. They may not know the battles you fought in private or the peace you finally gained after. The separation. But obedience is not validated by public approval. It is validated by divine fruit. And that fruit always appears in time. Right now, some of you feel exposed because you chose God over what looked reasonable to everyone else. From the outside, returning to your ex might seem logical. They might say, at least you know them, or people make mistakes, or love deserves another chance. But God does not lead by logic alone. He leads by revelation. Obedience often contradicts human reasoning because God sees outcomes that people cannot imagine. You obeyed not because it felt good, but because it felt right in your spirit. And that quiet conviction is more powerful than 1,000 opinions. There are seasons when obedience feels unrewarded. You do the right thing, yet the results are delayed. This delay is not denial, it is development. God uses time to strengthen your trust, refine your character, and detach your identity from immediate outcomes. If obedience were instantly rewarded, it would become transactional instead of relational. God wants your heart, not just your compliance. He wants you to trust Him even when the road ahead is unclear. Chosen one. Obedience explains itself later because God reveals in hindsight what He concealed in obedience. There will come a moment, sometimes, months, sometimes years from now, when you will look back and say, "Now I see why God told me not to go back." You will see the patterns you avoided, the damage you escaped, and the growth you preserved. You will meet people who align with your values, your faith, and your future, and you will realize that returning would have blocked what God was preparing. In that moment, obedience will no longer feel costly, it will feel wise. Think of Abraham, who left familiarity without knowing the destination. He obeyed without a map, trusting the voice of God over the security of the known. At the time, it looked reckless, but obedience positioned him to become the father of nations. In the same way, your decision to walk away may look unreasonable now, but it is positioning you for something greater than you can currently perceive. God never asks for obedience without attaching purpose to it. People may misinterpret your obedience as pride, coldness, or fear. Let them. You are not responsible for managing other people's understanding. You are responsible for guarding what God entrusted to you. Obedience sometimes requires silence. You do not have to explain every boundary or justify every choice. God understands, and that is enough. In time, the peace you walk in will speak louder than any defense you could offer. Chosen one, delayed explanation, is a test of faith. Will you remain obedient when there is no applause, no affirmation, and no visible reward? Will you trust God when obedience costs you companionship, comfort, and clarity? This is where maturity is formed. This is where spiritual authority is built. Anyone can obey when the path is obvious. Few can obey when the outcome is hidden. God also uses delayed explanation to protect you. If He revealed everything at once, you might grow proud or fearful. Instead, He asks you to walk step by step, trusting His character more than your circumstances. Each step of obedience strengthens your spiritual muscles. Each moment you resist the urge to go back reinforces your identity as someone led by God, not by emotions. One day, your obedience will become someone else's confirmation. People who questioned your decision will see your growth, your peace, and your stability, and they will understand. Your life will answer questions you never argued. Your progress will defend choices you never explained. That is the power of obedience. It does not need words to justify itself. Chosen one, stay the course. Do not abandon obedience just because the explanation has not arrived yet. God is faithful, and He never wastes surrender. What you obeyed in private, He will honor in public. What you sacrificed in faith, He will restore in greater measure. And when the full picture finally comes into focus, you will realize that obedience did not cost you anything. It saved you from everything that would have held you back. Chosen ones, hear this final truth. God is not trying to punish you, He is trying to position you. The relationship ended not because you failed, but because God succeeded in pulling you out before it destroyed what He placed within you. Do not romanticize what God rescued you from. Do not reopen doors He closed with purpose. What God is saying about your ex is simple but shocking. They were a chapter, not the book, a lesson, not the destination, a season, not the covenant. And if you trust Him enough to stay forward-facing, you will soon thank Him for the separation you once begged Him to undo.